Every pool player knows about the exciting swerve and massé shots where the cue ball curves down the table. Swerve and massé shots are very complex. They need to be demystified. This is part 2 of the Demystifying Spin and Swerve videos. To fully understand the concepts presented in this video, you should watch part 1 first. If you have, and you know all about the various phases of ball spin and the magic spiral, you're ready for part 2. So let's go! Recall from part 1 that all those side spin shots were executed with the cue stick perfectly level to the table. This caused the plane in which the spin axis tilts to be perpendicular to the table, allowing the spin spiral to be harmoniously in line with the forward ball direction. These conditions allow a side spin shot with a level cue to take a straight line path. But when the cue stick is elevated, things become quite literally less straightforward. The path of the cue ball will curve. We call this swerve, and when the curve is large, we call it a massé shot. What is an elevated cue? A so-called elevated cue stick is where the grip end is higher than the tip. It is no longer level to the table. The higher the back of the cue is raised, the more the ball swerves. Note that for most shots, the cue must be elevated at least a little to clear the rail. Lowering the tip for bottom spin contributes to cue elevation. And if the cue ball is closer to the rail, the cue stick angle increases further. For these reasons, almost all side spin shots have some amount of swerve. If the cue is only slightly elevated, the swerve is so small that it may not be noticeable. But even though you might not see it, even a little swerve can have enough effect to cause a missed shot. What causes swerve? As we saw in the part 1 video, the orientation of the cue determines the initial orientation of the cue ball spin axis. As we also learned in part 1, when shooting a top left side spin shot with a level cue, the magic spiral points in the same direction as the aim line, allowing the shot to travel a straight path. But look what happens when the cue stick is elevated. When the grip end of the cue is raised, both the spin axis plane and the spin axis itself are tilted forward. They are no longer perpendicular to the table. This rotates the spiral off to the side, and it is no longer in line with the direction the ball will be sent by the stroke. When the cue stick is elevated, the magic spin spiral and the direction of forward motion of the ball point in different directions. They are no longer in harmony. Here's a closer look at how elevating the cue stick throws the spin axis plane, and the magic spin spiral out of sync with the line of aim. This disharmony between the aim line and the spin spiral created by the elevated cue is the cause of swerve. The cue ball wants to go one direction due to the forward impulse of the cue, but it wants to go another direction due to the side spin imparted. You are asking the ball to go forward and sideways at the same time. And remember, some cue ball deflection also affects the initial direction. When both these directions are combined into a single path, a curve results. The curve is really a manifestation of the cue ball working out a compromise between the two incompatible directions. Once the curving ball finds a new direction that accommodates both impulses, the compromise is accepted, and the curve ends. The cue ball can then roll down the new path in a straight line. A lot happens during the curved path segment. Here is a more detailed look. First, let's move the aim plus deflection arrow back to the starting ball position. As we now know, due to the elevated cue, the spin axis and spiral do not point down the aim line and the spin axis plane is not perpendicular to the table. During the curve, the cue ball is sliding, not rolling naturally. This is the same as the sliding phase from part 1, except now the spin axis and spiral are rotated. As before, sliding creates friction. But now, because of the incompatible spin and forward directions, the friction can only be absorbed by finding a single, compatible direction that satisfies both the side spin and forward motion. Thus, friction causes the spin spiral direction to rotate toward the forward motion, and the forward motion to rotate toward the spin spiral. The two directions finally meet somewhere in between, at the compromised direction, losing some sidespin and some forward momentum in the process. At the end of the curve, not only has the spin axis reoriented to agree with the new direction of forward motion, but the spin axis plane has also become perpendicular to the table. As we saw in part 1, these conditions allow the cue ball to travel in a straight line, now along the new path. The ball now has natural roll. But not all the sidespin is absorbed by the sliding friction. Even after the ball starts rolling down its straight path, some sidespin remains, as shown by the non-horizontal spin axis. But now the spiral points in the same direction as the forward motion, and therefore the ball can follow a straight line, with sidespin, just like it did with the level cue shot from part 1. Here's another perspective, at a closer to normal speed. The famous mathematician Coriolis discovered some interesting geometry of a swerve shot that can help us aim swerve and massé shots. Let's look at the rationale behind the method. Here's the swerve shot again. An arrow is placed to show the orientation of the straight part of the path. Without changing its orientation, the arrow is moved back to the initial shot position. This arrow now points in a direction parallel to the final straight line path. So, if we can see this arrow when lining up the shot, we can predict the orientation of the straight line path of the ball. What Coriolis discovered was that two key points lie on this arrow, that together define its orientation. The first point is the point where the cue ball rests on the table. Call this point R. The second point is the spot on the table where the elevated cue points, or aims. Call this point A. To find point A, sight down the cue stick, through the ball, to the point on the table where the cue would intersect the table. Notice how the Coriolis arrow lies in between the two black arrows, the aim plus deflection arrow, and the spin spiral arrow. This reflects the process described earlier, where during the curved part of the path, the cue ball finds a new, compromised path, in between those two incompatible impulses. Using the Coriolis arrow, as defined by these 2 points, R and A, we can now predict the straight path direction of the cue ball after it finishes curving. Here's another look at the Coriolis aiming method, and how point A, the Coriolis arrow, the spin axis, spin plane, and magic spiral change with cue elevation. Notice the more dramatic changes at higher cue angles. The Coriolis method isn't perfect. Here are some points to keep in mind. It is difficult to visualize the RA line, because extending the aim line of the cue stick to find point A isn't easy. And the position of point A varies greatly, from very close to far down table. Projecting this line down table is tricky because its final position depends on the curved part of the path, which the Coriolis method does not define. We will look at the curved path next. Although deflection is shown in this video, Coriolis did not incorporate deflection into his analysis. Deflection will affect the final straight line path angle, although for many shots, the effect of deflection is insignificant relative to the swerve effect. As Dr. Dave states in his technical paper 8.19, with typical conditions, the final cue ball angle usually comes up a little short of the angle predicted by the Coriolis method. This could be due in part to squirt and multiple body collision effects associated with jamming the cue ball between the tip and slate. The Coriolis method only predicts the straight line segment of a swerve shot, not the curve. So, to predict the entire path, we need to estimate the shape of the curved segment, which we examine next. As we have just seen, the orientation of the straight line segment of a swerve shot depends primarily on the amount of cue elevation. What factors affect the shape of the curved segment of a swerve shot? The shape of the curve depends on both cue elevation and shot speed. We have already seen that cue elevation, that is, a non-level cue, is the cause of swerve. So it makes sense that the amount of curving is directly related to the amount of cue elevation. So, before looking at the effect of shot speed, let's take a look at the effect of cue elevation on the swerve curve. Here are 3 examples of different cue elevations and their effect on the amount of curving. Starting with the shot we've been seeing, this moderate cue elevation causes a moderate amount of swerve curve. The greater the cue stick elevation, the more the cue ball will curve. Note how the Coriolis point A changes location as cue elevation changes. As indicated by the purple Coriolis arrow, the straight line segment deviates away from the aim line much more with higher elevation. Logically then, the curve connecting into that more deviated straight path must be more acute. At these high cue stick angles, the ball is effectively given back spin. The spin axis therefore experiences something like the spin axis flip we saw in the Part 1 video when using bottom spin with a level cue. Also note that the effective swerve is much more dominant than cue ball deflection. When the cue stick is highly elevated, you can turbocharge the massé curve. Keeping the same cue orientation, just move the point of cue tip contact further away from the center of the cue ball. This has a dramatic effect on the position of point A, and therefore on the final direction of the ball, even to the point of sending it down a backward path. Alternatively, with very little elevation there is very little curve, so little that it is often imperceptible. Note how point A is pushed far down table, almost in line with the line of aim. As we saw earlier, the cue must commonly be slightly elevated to clear the rail, so this is a common situation. For such shots it may appear there is no swerve. But there is, and it can still cause a missed shot. Note, however, that cue ball deflection may be the more dominant factor here. Viewed from above, here are the shapes of the curves for the 3 example shots with varying amounts of cue elevation. Remember, the higher the elevation, the more acute the swerve curve. Finally, as seen in this top view, of a Florian Venom Kohler trick shot, the shape of the curved segment of a swerve or massé shot is a parabola. That's the effective cue elevation on the swerve curve. Now, let's look at the effective shot speed. As we have seen, the curved path segment is where the cue ball is sliding, not rolling naturally. Recall from Part 1 that the length of the sliding phase increases with shot speed. It logically follows that the length of the swerve curve, therefore increases with shot speed, and that is indeed the case. As shown in this faster shot, the curve is extended in length with increasing shot speed. This makes the curve wider and longer. But, as we saw with the Coriolis rule, if the cue elevation is unchanged, the final orientation of the straight segment is the same. It is parallel to the moderate speed shot. Conversely, with less shot speed, the curve is shorter, both in distance and time. But with the same cue elevation, the final straight segment is still parallel to the previous shots. Viewed from above, here are the shapes of the curves for the 3 example shots, with the same cue elevation, but with varying shot speeds. Remember, the higher the speed, the longer and wider is the swerve curve. It should now be apparent that swerve and massé shots are very powerful. If the effects of cue elevation and shot speed are combined in different amounts, almost any shape of the shot path can be achieved. In theory, nearly any spot on the table can be targeted, avoiding obstacles along the way. But this potential comes at a price. While the Coriolis method can help us aim these shots, swerve, and especially massé shots are tricky, requiring plenty of practice and shot feel to execute successfully. We now have a good understanding how the cue ball swerves when struck with an elevated cue. Here's a summary of the main points. With an elevated cue, a side spin shot with cue elevation causes swerve because it orients the magic spin spiral and spin axis in a direction that is incompatible with the direction of aim and forward motion. A swerve shot path has 2 segments, a curved segment, followed by a straight segment. During the curve, the directions of spin axis and forward motion merge into a compatible, straight line direction. The shape of the curved segment varies with both cue elevation and shot speed. Elevation determines the amount of curvature, and shot speed extends the curve in length and width. The orientation of the straight segment varies with cue elevation only, not shot speed, and can be estimated using the Coriolis method. Some sidespin remains even during the straight segment. When swerve is small, deflection may dominate. When swerve is large, deflection is relatively less significant. Swerve causes the cue ball to veer off the line of aim. Because most shots have at least a slightly elevated cue to clear the rail, most side spin shots have a little swerve. If not managed, even a small amount of swerve can cause a missed shot. On the other hand, swerve and massé shots can be very useful to curve around obstacles and hit targets at many different locations. But, while potentially useful, executing these shots successfully is difficult. The Coriolis method helps but isn't perfect. Other wayward effects caused by shooting with an elevated cue may also arise, such as ball hop and immediate swerve, which both modify swerve behavior. In short, swerve and massé shots require a lot of practice and good shot feel. Okay, that's all for Demystifying Ball Spin and Swerve, Part 2. If you missed it, make sure to watch Demystifying Spin and Swerve, Part 1. With both Part 1 and Part 2 under your belt, you should have a good understanding of how a cue ball spins and swerves. If you found this video helpful, you know what to do. Thanks for watching.